McHenry, Illinois is called the heart of the Fox for a reason. The Fox River doesn't just run through the city, but it also runs through its history and its origin. From being the main source of transportation, tourist attractions, and sports entertainment, to once again revitalizing the city and community as it grows to being a destination for residents and visitors alike. McHenry's history, from its past to its future, is all connected to the Fox.
My name is Dave Lester. I'm a Fox chain historian and author. And today I'm at the Munson Marine Facility, which is at the Water Tower Marina property at the foot of the Pearl Street Bridge at Riverside Drive. So 15 years ago, I researched and wrote a book on the history of boating on the Fox chain of lakes, after myself being involved with drag boat racing out at Blarney Island for more than 30 years. And what started as a research of the history of the racers, I found that there was a never-ending stream of boating and boat racing history that reached all the way back into the initial development of this portion of the Fox River Valley back in the mid-1800s. So as the Great Wisconsin Glacier retreated 21,000 years ago, it left an inland sea, and we were at the southern border of the Michigan Inland Sea. This area was completely underwater for 3,500 years after the glacier retreated, until one day about 17,500 years ago, when a breach occurred in the southern moraine at Algonquin. Virtually overnight, the entire sea emptied and scoured out the area that we know as the Fox River Valley, which is 128 miles north to south from Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, all the way down to the Illinois River at Ottawa, Illinois. So what we commonly know today as the Fox River and chain of lakes is a 20-mile navigable stretch from Algonquin to Wilmot. And McHenry is basically the midpoint. A grist mill and dam was put into work in Algonquin. So this raised the water level, making the whole waterway navigable from Algonquin all the way up to Pistake Bay. It changed again when the Fox River Valley Railroad put a station in on the west side of McHenry, and this enabled sportsmen who had been coming here for many years to get from Chicago through Elgin to McHenry in 2.5 hours versus a day's travel on horse and buggy. From there, they could travel 1 hour to the south or 1 hour to the north by boat, and there were steamers, steam paddle wheelers, that were operating regularly from McHenry, from Algonquin, and later from Fox Lake that got people wherever they wanted to go. So by the mid-1880s, there were 4 primary boat line operators. They operated these steam paddle wheelers that were not just involved with passengers arriving from Chicago, sportsmen, tourists, vacationers. They also were the supply chain for food staples, for cooking oil. And they also carried the news around to the various shoreline residents. And very soon there were many sportsmen's lodges, resorts, hotels, and camps to accommodate all of the vacationers. So tourism was alive and well. For the trades, it going in the other direction, being a primarily agricultural area, all of the dairy, the eggs, the cattle, the produce, the food crops could easily be moved by paddle wheeler all the way down to McHenry or even Algonquin, where they would be loaded onto trains and into the insatiable markets in Chicago that also had an unending need for lumber and gravel. So if we go back to 1910, this exact property was occupied by a Chicago boat builder, Mr. Everett Hunter, who came here, moved his business from Chicago, where he was already a prominent boat builder, and soon after he was known as Hunter Boat Lines, and Boat Company was the biggest boat builder for excursion boats, family launches, and other varieties of boats in the entire country. And Hunter was not the only boat builder in the area. One of his employees, Mr. George Kramer, opened up the Kramer Mueller Boat Company, which is today at the base of the 120 bridge. And he also built gentlemen's runabouts, family runabouts, and leaned very heavily into the racing of boats that around 1910, 1915 had just been going into hydroplaning boat hulls, which had an astounding speed of 18 to 20 miles an hour. So after the arrival of the trains in McHenry in 1854, McHenry became the doorway to the Fox River and leading up to the Northern Lakes. Fox Lake and Grass Lake had what were known as rare and exotic Egyptian water lilies. Well, these were American lotus, I should say. And when Hunter had arrived in 1910, well, he quickly had 18 excursion boats. He was involved in making sure that those boats were used. He advertised and heavily promoted daily excursions to the water lotus beds. And also in 1909, before he moved his business here, he was a co-founder and the first Commodore for the McHenry Powerboat Club. And in 1909, they had weekly races. And these racing activities, they continued year after year after year. Different organizations, different fundraising events for the waterway. In 1912, he was part of the Fox River Navigable Waterway Association, who built the first McHenry Dam that also had a 15 by 70 foot boat lock that assured continuing navigation from Algonquin all the way to the upper lakes, but also raised the water level to assure that that navigation was possible through the full boating season into the fall when those water levels were low. At the time that the excursion boats, when transportation by boat was the number one means to get around from point A to point B on the Fox River and lakes, excursion boats, primarily built by Hunter, were owned and operated by each of the major resort operators. Mineola, for instance, had 3 different excursion boats named Vivian 1, 2, and 3 of different sizes to accommodate their guests in moving them around from point A to point B throughout the waterway. At the high point in 1920s, Everett Hunter's largest excursion boat carried 200 passengers. It was a double-decker. And when it was time to go to a boat racing event or something along those lines, he knew how to move the passengers and keep the excitement level high. So a couple of the Hunter excursion boats that operated from the municipal docks here near the Riverside Hotel in McHenry were the Gladine and the Gladys and the Gladola. They carried upwards of 50 passengers each, back and forth from here twice a week to dance pavilions up on Pistachey Bay, or to races, or simply to go to things at the Fox River at a place called the Midway at the tip of Nippersink Point, which became very, very important after the turn of the century.
Hi, my name is Pat Wirtz. I've lived in McHenry for 77 years. My grandparents lived on Riverside Drive back when it was called Water Street. My grandfather, John B. Wirtz, had a number of different jobs in McHenry. One included being the second police chief in McHenry. The main position he held for a number of years was machinist at the Hunter Boat Company. And on weekends in the summer, he would take the boat, the Gladine, and he was the skipper on that one. And he would take a number of passengers up to Grass Lake to see the lotus beds. This goes back to 1929. He was on a Sunday run. It was August 19th, I think. He was the skipper, and back then he took his oldest son, who was 25 at the time. That would have been my Uncle John. And they had a full boatload, and those trips, I'm sure, were not extremely fast. It probably was a 4-hour trip at least. And part of the trip would be going into Pistachey Bay, which back then the newspapers called it Pistaqua Bay, which was interesting. It was a double-decker, and one of the girls up on top decided to jump into the water. The newspaper article said she may have fallen in, but there were other boats there. She was young, and she jumped into the water. The other boats grabbed her and took her. Meanwhile, my grandfather, as you can imagine, panicked, and he had my 25-year-old uncle jump in to save her. The sad thing was, his body never came up. It was tangled in the seaweed in Pistachey Bay. 3 divers from the Fox Lake area, and they were all Native Americans that still lived in the area, and they dove searching for him, but never found him. And it actually came up a week later because of a storm that went through and released his body.
My name is Frank McClatchy. I've lived in McHenry my whole life. I'm a former alderman for 16 years here on the city council. Right now we're sitting in the Old Bridge Tavern, one of the first taverns in McHenry. And we're right on the river, and the Old Bridge actually expanded right here. The Old Bridge is located at the corner of Riverside Drive and Pearl Street. We used to, back in the day, in the 1920s, harvest clamshells, and they made buttons out of them. Back in the 20s, it was a big fashion thing to have shiny buttons on your coats, your shirts, or whatever. It was part of the Art Deco era, and that's when people really liked little flashy stuff, and it was a big thing then. Clamshells, because actually they're called mother of pearl, and they're very smooth and shiny, and if you hit different lights on them, they're different colors. It was a big thing back then. Well, it was named after the old bridge, which was the new bridge and the only bridge. That bridge was built in 1880. This tavern was here, I believe, 1840s. This was first established. Now, if you look out, before they put the dam in down south of here, all this land probably went out about another 30, 40 feet. There's pictures of people just hanging out here, having a real good time. So Old Bridge became very popular to come to. Some of the first owners, his name was Buck, so it was called Buck's Place when it first kicked off. Him and a couple other guys during Prohibition got arrested for selling alcohol in here. That was the early days, and then a guy by the name of Smoltz Miller bought it in, I believe, 1940. It became the place to go to.
Surprisingly, the Depression years were actually the biggest spur for growth in the region. Not just the shorelines, but the greater region as well. Because of FDR's roadway programs, a lot of those secondary roadways and the highway system were created through the 30s and the 40s. The population from 1930 to 1960, right here, quadrupled. The opposite of what you would think about the effects of the Great Depression actually occurred here. Another aspect of the Great Depression was that the many opulent resorts and sportsmen's clubs, during the Depression, they went bust, basically. A lot of the resort hotels and lodges were razed, and their grounds were turned into residential subdivisions. As cars gave freedom and the paving of the roadways gave freedom away from the waterway, on the waterway itself, the small launches and boats, 20 feet and less even, gave that same freedom to all of the local residents. With the economic recoveries following World War II, after 1945, the paddle wheelers were no longer required to move goods up and down the waterway. Also, privately owned boats remove the need for excursion boats to provide the primary means of transportation. But we had a long legacy going back before the turn of the century for boat racing and other sites, such as the lotus beds, such as the dance pavilions, and fundraising events for the various waterway groups. There was still sufficient cause for tourists to come from Chicago to spend time vacationing up in the Fox River and Chain of Lakes area. Also to visit those lotus water beds. They were still there into the 1960s. So they didn't entirely go away, but for the most part, from having a utilitarian value, the excursion boats really did diminish quite a bit. The boat racing legacy that started around the turn of the century continued. It never stopped. It was slowed somewhat by the World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression, but the enthusiasm never slowed. And soon after these events, the boat racing came back as a weekly or bi-weekly event, and the shorelines would be covered with thousands of spectators who enjoyed just to watch, to the thrill of these boats that started off going 20 miles an hour, soon became 60 miles an hour by the 1950s. And a few of the more spectacular and the fastest boats were built right here by the Kramer Boat Company and others. Hunter got into building hydroplaning boats, and also the well-known family here, Peterson Park. Two of the Peterson boys were building outboard race boats that became popular in the early 1900s as well. So many of the races, especially those promoted by Hunter and the McHenry Powerboat Club, took place right here, right at the foot of the bridge here, all the way up and around an island that no longer exists called Moon Island at the mouth of the river at Pistake Lake. So they would traverse back and forth for a distance of about 10 miles. After World War II, we had the Switzer family. They built their first boats in the basement of their grandparents' home on the Harmony Bay portion of Pistake Bay. And then they moved to the basement of the Gladstone's department store here in McHenry. So for a period of 10 years, they were right here building boats before going to Crystal Lake and expanding and building more boats for another decade or so. And their boats are still very, very popular today as collector's items. We also had one of Switzer's employees, Mr. Umbarger, founded Hustler Boats, still in operation in McHenry here. And he also was a boat racer, built race boats exclusively for a while. And then both the Switzers and Mr. Umbarger also manufactured recreational boats, family runabouts and ski boats.
Pearl Street Bridge was built in 1880 to 1881. We needed something to get across the river, and of course that was the way to go. When we were little kids, we used to jump off it. Dive in, it was very shallow around here, so we used to jump off it all the time. It was a one-way bridge, and a lot of people would play chicken. I mean, someone had to back up, because if you started going over and another, it was just crazy. Old Bridge Tavern had a Christmas tree they put out on the ice. You can't do that now because Fox Lake put in the sewer plant and warmed the water up so it doesn't really freeze like it used to. But they used to put a tree out there, ran an extension cord out there, and they'd take bets to see when that tree would melt or float away. So the Fox River is key to McHenry, and we just finished the Riverwalk, which stretches from just a quarter mile from here all the way down to Miller Point, and then up through Green Street. Eventually, it's going to go across Green Street all the way up to 120. We're so fortunate to have this river to bring people here, the restaurants. Back when this was called Water Street and boats started being built here, it brought people from Chicago. It really put McHenry on the map. And now there's a resurgence in that because of the Riverwalk and because it's just a nice place to live. It's laid out very nice. So back in the day, they started it, and we're still working on it.